But we're going to turn our attention now to a conversation, another important aspect of rethinking what we can rebuild in America around criminal justice reform. We're going to start with a presentation by Marcus Ellis. Marcus is the Chief of Staff for the Safer, Stronger DC Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement. He's going to help us kick off a conversation followed by this panel of distinguished New Deal leaders who are doing reforms in their communities to kind of rethink the criminal justice system generally, recognizing the inequities in it, as well as the fact that reducing crime cannot only be accomplished by law enforcement. It has to be a more whole approach. So Marcus is a advisor to Cities United, which has put together kind of a comprehensive framework for thinking holistically about criminal justice and safe communities. So he's going to walk us through that, and then he will turn it over to Will Jawando to kick off our panel. So Marcus, thanks for being here.
Thank you. Appreciate you having me. First off, good morning, everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to be here today. I want to start off just by saying I'm a board member for Cities United, and I serve here under Mayor Muriel Bowser, as mentioned, under the Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement, where we focus on addressing violent crime from a public health approach. I'm a native Washingtonian, so for those that are not here not from the district, welcome to, I understand it was crazy to say, welcome to my city, and we appreciate having you here. Just to kind of start off, so we're having this conversation right around reimagining public safety and what that could look like. We have done this one way for a really long time, and I think that collectively we might be able to say we have not accomplished the results that we would like to see. And so part of the Cities United mission, as you see on the slide, is this: we're committed to working with cities, community, and young leaders to reimagine what public safety looks like. I want to hone in on an important point that's on that slide as you read through that, and that's the youth voice, young leaders. At Cities United, what we believe is that we try to solve this problem, resolve this problem too often without having the right people at the table, and that has included eliminating the youth voice. And so we have a keen focus on making sure that they are not just at the table, but have a voice that's valued and listened to and appreciated. Our vision, creating safe and healthy, hopeful communities. You can see our mission. Cities United supports a national network of mayors who are committed to what we're doing. We can't approach this problem of violence just by tackling it from your city standpoint. You have to form national coalitions in order to reach the goals we're trying to achieve. And Cities United has done a great job since 2011 in bringing mayors across the city together to support their efforts and help them to design a roadmap toward their vision and toward their plan. Our core values: social justice, equity, youth voice, collaboration, and innovation. This slide really speaks to some of the fatal and non-fatal violent crimes and victimization that we've seen across our city, across our country. This is why we focus on young Black men and boys. These are the most impacted by community violence, and they live in the communities that carry the heaviest burden. What we've noticed, as you can see, is that the numbers continue to rise, even during a pandemic. That's because when you talk about a population that is growing up in poverty, growing up without fair opportunities, growing up with systematic injustices, a pandemic is not going to slow down homicides. These are things that you can't see being a COVID-19, but what I can see living in communities such as the ones where we're seeing the most violence is what impacts me every day. Whether that be the walk to the store where I'm in danger, whether that be the trip to my school where it's tough for me to get there because of some of the things that I might be impacted by on my way. And so across the nation, sadly, we saw numbers of homicides go up during the pandemic. According to the Gun Violence Archives, you can see the numbers there. We have a high number of officer-involved incidents where the subject was injured or killed. We're talking about close to 14,000 of these incidents. What that says to us is that we cannot just attack this problem from one angle. Obviously, we have to stop the violent crimes that are taking place in communities, but there is a holistic issue to approach as it relates to community of colors and their relationships with law enforcement. The numbers speak. There's an issue there, and we have to address all of these things in a holistic way. So how do we do this? First, we want to interrupt. We want to get in front of a lot of the issues that are taking place. We want to address those underlying factors that exist. We don't want to just start right here where the problem is. We want to really look at how did we get here? What were some of the things that caused someone to decide to pick a gun up and use it to harm someone else? You don't just come out the womb thinking this is the way I want to live my life. There are things that existed that happened prior to get you to this point. And then we talk about dismantling systems of inequality. We have to, of inequity, we really have to take a look at the entire picture. Take a look at the school systems. Earlier in the presentation just before, there were so many overlapping issues that existed in the healthcare world that exist in the violence prevention world. That's not uncommon. It speaks to a lot of the systems that we're looking to attack. Invest in the sustainability of new administrative and operational activities. Key word there, invest. I'm happy to say that in our city under Mayor Bowser, we started off at the Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement, where I serve as Chief of Staff, with a $2.6 million budget 4 years ago. At this point, our budget is now 4 years later at $28 million. You can have all the great ideas you want, but without the proper investment in systems, in legislation, in resources in the communities that we're aiming to serve, you're not going to be able to get there. And so that's another message the Cities United carries across the country. Are you really willing to make the proper investments into the work we're looking to do? When I started my work in D.C., well, I'm about to date myself. I've been in D.C. government for 20 years now. But when I started in this particular realm of work, Cities United came to Washington, D.C. They sat down with myself, deputy mayors, chiefs of police, and what they did is they helped us create a roadmap. And that roadmap was really about addressing all the different entities that we need to touch upon. And so when you look at the roadmap, we're talking about things like hospital-based interventions. We're talking about religious institutions coming together to really look at this problem holistically. We're talking about diversion options, whereas instead of placing someone in an incarcerated environment, what else can we do besides put them in an environment that can pretty much become something they're accustomed to because they grow up in a system as such. And so I had the opportunity to serve as the superintendent for our long-term juvenile detention city here in Washington, D.C. And what I saw in that facility over and over again is that youth would be incarcerated starting at the age of around 13. They would come in and out of our system until they were about 21. At that point, that system and coming in and out of it is all that they know. And what I recognized quickly was that they were fine with it while they were with us. They were receiving 3 meals a day. They were receiving the love and attention that they deserved. But ultimately, they had to go back to the community. And when they went back to the community, we saw a tremendous digression in their progress. So what did that tell us is that you don't need to incarcerate. You kind of need to fix the situation that they're coming from, being the community. That's what we have to address. That gets back to some of these underlying factors that I'm speaking to. And so again, when I came to D.C., to do this particular work, Cities United sat down with Washington, D.C., and they helped us design a roadmap. That roadmap led to the legislation that then created the Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement. I want to stay on that point if I can just for a second, and that's legislation. Understanding and respecting that I have several elected officials in the room, the legislation part is important because we need these systems, we need these offices, we need these budgets to stay in place beyond who's in the political seat. folks come in and respectfully they have new ideas and new thoughts about the way they want to do things, but if we can get stuff legislated, it's not just a program, it's something that's instituted into the way we do business in the District of Columbia, which is extremely important. When we're talking about interrupting the cycle, we talked about it earlier, violence interruption. Violence interruption is something that we've invested in heavily to the tune of about $15 million here in the district. And I gotta be honest with you all, Cities United gives me the opportunity to speak to several jurisdictions about our work. And at times, you almost wanna pull back when you're talking about your level of investment because so many cities just aren't getting these types of dollars toward what they have the passion, they have the people, but they don't have the money to support it. Violence interrupters are people that are on the ground, specialized skill set. They're doing what police officers are attempting to do, but they're doing it without a gun, they're doing it without a badge, they're doing it without a bulletproof vest. They're talking directly to individuals who have guns in their hands and are thinking about doing something with that gun. They're presenting them with options. They're saying, hey, listen, before you make that decision, let's talk about some alternatives that might work better for you. Let's talk about the results of what you might face if you do pull that trigger. Thank you. I thought I was talking louder. And so a lot of what, can you guys hear me well? Okay, awesome. So a lot of what we're seeing is that as we invest in those folks, we're able to get in front of a lot of the things we're seeing. I touched on it earlier, the hospital-based intervention. This is intervention that happens after, sadly, after someone has been a victim of a gunshot or a stabbing or something of that nature. Thank you. And so what we find from that is that we're able to get into the hospital, talk to that person while they're still there, while they're having the thoughts in their mind, perhaps retaliation or something of that nature. We can get in front of these obstacles. We can get in front of these challenges they might be facing, intervene, provide their family and their support systems with what they might need to move on in a more positive way toward their recovery. We talked about diversion and alternative plans. This is just really invested in other options. What else can we do with a troubled youth in terms of how we serve them through resources versus incarceration? A coordinated response, and that's really having all these entities talking, not a siloed approach. And then collaborative public safety funding and models. This goes back to really investing in what we are aiming to do. Systems of inequality, I touched on these earlier. Boosting education, expanding healing center engagement, build on inclusive economy, reshape criminal justice systems, and bolster family support. This is a holistic approach. This isn't a cookie cutter approach. It's looking at individuals and really identifying what it is they need and what resources can assist them to be most successful. We touched on this, dismantling systems of inequity. You can see the model there that speaks to that. Really looking at the patterns that exist, taking a look at the structures that are created often that have been created by design, and really being honest with ourselves and having real conversation about how we can address some of what currently is taking place. We go back to investment, and for me, I'm going to hone in on this because it's such a key point. Really making sure that we understand, first of all, what is the cost? What is the true cost to public safety in looking at this in a different way? I think that we have budgets. We know what it looks like to fund a police department. What does it fund to do the work in a different way? What does it fund? What does it cost? What is the budget to reimagine this? Again, just going back to our roadmap, and again, for anyone interested in having Cities United have this conversation with you or your city, we are happy to come out to you. We hold a national convening each year, and I can provide more information on that. But this is important work. It's dire work. For us, there's been an epidemic going on far before the pandemic of losing young Black men and boys of color. And so we are committed to being a part of that change. We absolutely need the help of everyone in this room and beyond. And with that, I hope you guys will stay connected, and I appreciate your time, and I'm open for any questions you may have. Yes.
First of all, thank you for your presentation. Shalea Harris, School Board, Memphis, Tennessee. I looked on one of your slides and it said boost education as number one. What does that look like in practice for you?
Thank you for the question. And so when I think about boost education, I think about the fact that across the country, depending on your zip code, the level of education you receive might be different, even in the same city. How do we make sure that the opportunities, starting from a very early stage, and typically we're talking about pre-K3, equal the same opportunities as our counterparts in other parts of the very city that someone might live in? I think that it's about, one, it's about opportunity. It's about a fair shot at being successful educationally and making sure that we have equitable school systems kind of across our jurisdictions, ensuring that that fair opportunity is able to be met.
So I'm the co-panelist moderator with my group here, so I'm gonna introduce my co-panelists. I'm gonna give a couple minutes of remarks on the work that we've done, and I'm gonna stand up here so you guys can see too. And then we'll get into a conversation. This is obviously an important set of issues. I think the question that we just had about no matter what city you're in, what the demographics are, this is an issue, right? And it's being made an issue politically, and we know that that has happened before and it's happening now. So I'm Jawando. I'm a council member at large in Montgomery County, Maryland. We're the largest jurisdiction in the state of Maryland, 1.1 million of our 6 million residents. We have 4 of the top 10 most diverse cities in the country. We're 52% between Black, Latino, and Asian, about 20% Black, 20% Latino, 12% Asian of all types. It was an honor to win the award yesterday for the use of force policies, which I'll talk about later. Yeah, you don't have to clap. That's all right. I appreciate it. We've all done great stuff. I'm with, you can clap for my co-panelists, St. Louis Mayor Tishaura Jones, who was, I'm gonna give you a little, just 30 seconds, sworn in as the 47th mayor and the first Black female mayor in the history of St. Louis on April 20th, 2021. And she has worked as the treasurer, she has worked as a state legislator. She's got a whole bunch of experience, and she's just an awesome person. And I know she'll talk about her community's first approach and what they're doing in St. Louis. Also want to introduce, so we gave her a round of applause, but let's do it again, one more time for Tishaura. Also want to introduce Columbus City Attorney Alex Klein. Did I say? Zach. Why does it say Alex on my seat? I'm going to kick someone's. Josh, okay, it's Zach Klein. Sorry, Zach. Zach is the attorney, Columbus City Attorney, and has served in that position since 2018. And he was on the Columbus City Council, including president from 2016 to 2017. And he's been really leading the charge on diversion, on appropriate prosecution. He'll talk about all that. I'm sure he's done many other things, but making this system more fair. And it really is a system. I really appreciated Marcus's slides of showing that whole system. I saw a lot of people taking pictures. This is a systemic issue, and it needs systemic solutions. And I think today we'll talk about several points in time. So please give Zach a round of applause. Okay, so I'm going to just do a couple minutes on what we've been doing, and then we'll get into the conversation. I'll turn it over to Tishaura and then Zach. Reimagining public safety, like what does it mean, right? The term gets thrown around. It's kind of like equity right now. Everyone says it, and everyone has a different meaning. For me, I think the presentation you saw is a part of it. We have to work on every part of that pipeline. What are the root causes? How do we keep people safe? How do we deal with the fact that there's more guns than people in the United States? And that I'm sure in your jurisdictions like mine, that even went even higher during the pandemic. Gun sales skyrocketed, right? And how do we deal with that? And then also, how do we deal with the legacy of systemic racism and inequity that is really at the root of our criminal justice system, right? If you talk about the origins of the police force in the South in interactions with Black people, those were slave patrols. You can go to the African American History Museum and see the actual badges that were organized in the Carolinas in the 1700s to round up escaped enslaved individuals. That is the first African-American interaction with the predecessor of law enforcement. In the North, they were used to bust unions and a whole bunch of other things. So you have to understand that history of policing and criminal justice if you're going to talk about where we are today. We've obviously morphed into a system of mass incarceration where we incarcerate more people than any other place in the world, disproportionately black and brown residents, right? Just give you an example, in my county, black residents make up 19% of the population. They account for 50% of the arrests. They account for 55% of the people who have a use of force interaction with police. Our juveniles arrested in schools, 50% African American. If you add Latinos, you're 75% of the people arrested. When you dig into what they're arrested for, the vast majority of our arrests in Montgomery County, and this isn't true everywhere, are low-level arrests. Disorderly conduct, low-level drug possession, resisting arrest, things that other people might not be getting arrested for, right? We all know, for example, marijuana usage is, some studies have suggested is even higher in white communities, but it's at least the same as it is in black communities. But we know who's arrested for those things. So you have to tell the truth. In my city, in my county, I'm spending a lot of time on the data because I think the truth telling of it is so important to build the political will to address the really hard stuff. Right? No, most people, if you're in a good city, you're not going to argue about investing in recreation and after-school programs, even maybe diverting some calls. We're having trouble with this, but mental health, people who are experiencing homelessness or dealing with a mental health crisis, diverting some of those calls or having co-deployment with police. But you're really going to have, I've had an uphill battle, and I think many people have an uphill battle, with saying the system, the way it is designed and implemented and set up, is set up to produce inequity. You have to show people the data to understand that. You go to traffic stops in our county. I'm sure similar numbers. And I say all this because you should know these numbers. I think we all have to know these numbers because you cannot attack it from a racial equity lens if you don't, and you can't change the system of policing unless you know and can demonstrate what's going on. You're 3 times more likely as an African American resident to be pulled over in our county. In a place like Bethesda, and it's one of our wealthier, whiter areas, it's 80% white, you're 7 times more likely to be pulled over as a black resident as in Bethesda as a white resident. And it's 80% white, that community, right? I mentioned the arrest statistics. I think we got to talk about that. So what do we need to do? I'll spend my last 2 minutes and turn to Tishaura on that. I have a theory of the case that I would propose to you that we need to do 3 things all at once. In addition to everything that was on that chart, making those investments, I'm going to focus on the policing side because I think it's really hard, and for all too often it's been like, well, just let them do whatever they're doing, and we haven't really had a lot of influence on it. We need to shrink the size and scope of what police focus on, right? We need a more focused, more highly trained, and more accountable police force. Right? I think I agree with Marcus. We need police. I'm not on the, we don't need police. But what we need is we need the right folks from the right communities with the right backgrounds and training that are paid well. So, you know, the defund people love me until I say we should pay our police more. We absolutely should. Just like teachers, we should pay people what they deserve to do the right job, and then we should hold them accountable. But we don't need them in schools. We don't need them in an enforcement capacity. After school basketball, okay. Patrolling the halls, not okay, right? We don't need them responding when someone's peeing on the side of a building or dealing with a mental health crisis that's nonviolent. If they do respond, they need to be co-deployed with a crisis intervention counselor, right? In Eugene, Oregon, if you heard of the CAHOOTS model, 40% of their calls diverted into 911 to a non-police response, right? I know we don't, do we have any Oregon people here? I think we have someone from Oregon. Yes, there you go. All right, you're Oregon. We are consulting with them. They're coming and helping us, and we're building out our Crisis Now model. There's other models. Baltimore has a model. DC's working on a model, but that type of model. Then you need to have strong accountability. When people do things wrong, the unions shouldn't get in the way. They should have the same rules as anyone else. You should be able to exit them and discipline them, and it should be transparent about what they did. And that is a problem as well. And I think you got to do all those things. You have to hire the right people, narrow their focus, support them, and then hold them accountable. And I think there's a lot of things within each of those, but I'll end with this. The use of force bill that we passed, it raised the standard of when you can use deadly force from reasonable, which is the Supreme Court Graham standard, to necessary, right? As a last resort after you used other alternatives, right? After you've de-escalated the situation. So the courts will have to decide what that means in relation to the Graham standard of reasonableness, but it's clearly a higher standard that we've defined. And I think that's important because we give our police a lot of power. We give them the right to deprive people of life and liberty, to take their lives. The county, the community, the state should be able to decide how that power is used. And that's what we won the award for. It was a big fight to raise it. There's some federal legislation that's seeking to do the same, the Peace Act, which has not passed. Obviously, we haven't had any criminal justice reform to pass. If you think about all that's happened with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and all the people who have died and all the global protests, we still have not passed a federal police reform bill. That shows you how intractable these problems are. And that at the local level, it's even more so, I think, because that's where the rubber hits the road. And those 18,000 police departments and agencies where you're trying to change culture that's been ingrained for hundreds of years. So I think we have all of a role to play, obviously, and I know you're all trying to do it. I'm going to turn it over now to my sister, Tishaura Jones, to talk about their approach in St. Louis.
Thank you. Thank you, Will. You just stole all my thunder. No, good morning, everyone. It's so good to be in person again after being virtual for so long. As Will mentioned, I'm the 47th mayor and the first Black woman mayor of the city of St. Louis, but I'm also the first mayor in over 20 years to be born, raised, and still live in a predominantly Black neighborhood in the city of St. Louis. So many nights, my son and I fall asleep to the lullaby of gunshots in the distance. And my son has almost been a victim of gun violence twice in the last 5 years, as well as I've lost several relatives to gun violence. One just back this past summer in August. She was 27 years old. She was 2 months pregnant and was literally at the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong people and lost her life due to, a fight. So it's personal for me, and it's personal for people across St. Louis, and that's why reimagining public safety is my top priority as mayor. Maintaining the status quo cannot continue to govern St. Louis, and we have to be innovative in our approach to keep people safe. My goal is simple. I want St. Louis to win again. I want residents to thrive regardless of the color of their skin, who they love, or how they worship. Their zip code should not dictate their quality of life or their opportunity. So I'm working to right historic wrongs that have left entire neighborhoods, entire parts of our city disinvested and discouraged for decades. And that's the vision that I'm using as I try to improve public safety in St. Louis. So I want to start by sharing our 3 public safety principles that we are using to guide our discussions. So first, our first principle starts with using smart on crime strategies to ensure that we can prevent and address crime when it occurs. We prioritize innovation to achieve better outcomes and ensure that our residents and visitors are physically safe. Our second principle prioritizes healthy communities. We talked about healthcare earlier. We cannot ignore the intersection of healthcare and gun violence. We are also in the process of declaring gun violence as a public health crisis. And the third principle is responsive governing. The people closest to the problem are closest to the solution. So it's our responsibility to listen and be accountable for their concerns, and they are our biggest partners in addressing public safety. Like most cities, St. Louis experienced an uptick in crime in our downtown or our central business district. So along with community, business, and civic leaders, we launched the Downtown Engagement and Public Safety Initiative. As the old saying goes, an idle mind is a devil's workshop. Well, an idle downtown is a troublemaker's paradise. And that's exactly what was happening in our downtown during the pandemic. Our streets were bare, There was nobody around, and so our young people started shooting out the windows and just using what are those scooters, going everywhere and really terrorizing people. So it was an innovative cross-sector approach to activate our downtown so everybody feels safe and welcome. So we temporarily added 30 new officers to a patrol beat on the weekends. But our number one goal was this wasn't an either-or proposition, it was a both-and proposition. We can protect our assets downtown and provide safe and fun activities for our young people. Because when I was growing up, not too long ago, there were things for our young people to do. They had teen clubs, they had skating rinks. All of those things are closed now. And so what are they going to do? They're going to get in trouble. They're going to find something to do that may not always be productive. So it's a both-and approach. Protect our assets downtown, but also doing things to engage our youth in fun and safe activities. So we've done a cypher downtown, which is what I understand is a rap battle. Y'all knew these millennials use new words now. We've done painting with them, so we're using arts and culture as well. And we're also in the process of setting up some winter activities to help them use their creative skills to make their own demo records using one of the studios downtown. So all of these things address crime at its root. And so, like we talked about Cahoots in Oregon, we allocated $5 million in funding for cops and clinicians. It's a co-responder model that dispatches behavioral support specialists to mental health crisis calls to take the burden off police. So out of the over 2,000 calls that cops and clinicians has responded to, 98% of the people they've encountered have been diverted from jail. So this type of diversion works. We also invested an additional $5 million in cure violence and other community violence intervention programs. Just a note here, your ARPA funds can be used for community violence intervention programs. This program hires and trains people from the community so they can help de-escalate violence as violence interrupters like Marcus talked about and prevent violence before it starts. We have that in 3 neighborhoods and we'll be expanding that using the money we are allocating from ARPA. And lastly, as you saw on TV or Beyonce's internet, Mayor Quentin Lucas and I were having a press conference after we did a roundtable about gun violence, and gunshots rang out like mere yards away from where we were standing. And I didn't flinch because I have, Stockholm syndrome, living in a community where I hear gunshots more often than not. And sadly, it went viral, but I've become so desensitized, and many people in my city have also become so desensitized to gun violence because we have more guns than people in our country. But when I got home that night and I showed it to my son, he thought they were shooting at me. And so he shouldn't have to grow up with that sort of trauma as well, with his mother being mayor. So a couple of other things that we're doing, we're adding 28 social workers to our city city payroll or our city's workforce to support our unhoused, reentry, and victim support. This is part of a new program we're calling Social Workers for St. Louis. And we talked about, again, how many we have more guns than people. A lot of this is due to our state's preemption in gun laws. From 2007 and on, they have been constantly relaxing our gun laws and have tied the hands of local municipalities to enact common sense gun safety on the local level. So gun deaths in 2019, Missouri had the 6th highest gun-related death rate in the country, not just in the state, in the country. And recently, you may have seen on 60 Minutes, they passed the Second Amendment Preservation Act, which prohibits law enforcement from enforcing federal gun laws. And sheriffs from across the state have spoken out against this horrible law, and we are currently suing the state to overturn it. So that's a lot. It's what we're up against, and the state makes it difficult for us to remove guns from our street, but that doesn't mean that we're not using the other tools in the toolbox and everything that we can to address gun violence at the root cause. So look forward to this conversation.
Thank you, Tishaura. Zach, you are up, sir.
Well, thanks. I'm Zach Klein. I'm the Columbus City Attorney. I know in talking to some folks, a lot of y'all were kind of surprised that I was an independently elected official because, especially folks who have a municipal background, their city attorney or law director is typically appointed maybe by the mayor or the council. Much to the chagrin sometimes of the mayor and the council, I'm independently elected and I don't work for them, which is great for me. But so Seattle, San Diego, Los Angeles, and Columbus are probably the 4 largest cities in the United States that have independently elected city attorneys. So the role that I play as is pertinent to this discussion is, one, I'm a prosecutor. I have about 177 people that work for me, half of whom are in the criminal division. My jurisdiction is all misdemeanor crimes that occur within the city of Columbus. We do not do juvenile. I do not have juvenile jurisdiction. So it's a busy court. We do about 110,000 cases a year. That's everything from traffic all the way up to something very serious like domestic violence. The other pertinent role that I play is, among other things, one of my clients is the Columbus Division of Police. So it's an interesting perspective of understanding and working with the police. They do not report to me. They report to the Department of Public Safety Director and then to the mayor. But having the influence to work with any sort of client, in this instance, the police, to be able to influence change. So when I ran for Columbus City Attorney, I started with the premise of how can we rethink and reform the criminal justice system, as prosecutors. Things that are directly within my control as the prosecutor in the city of Columbus. Because I believe in the adage of you do the same thing over and over again expecting different results. That's been the criminal justice system in our country for decades. And we've seen the same results over and over again without any significant change for not only the victims that are victimized, but also the actual true community safety that we seek to preserve and protect. So some of the reforms that we've made that were within my control are we eliminated cash bail for all nonviolent misdemeanors. We stopped the prosecution of misdemeanor marijuana possession in the city of Columbus, even though it's still illegal under the Ohio Revised Code. I had that discretion as a prosecutor. I told police, stop bringing me the cases. We're not doing them anymore. We also, working with the Division of Police, created a policy that favors summons over arrest for nonviolent misdemeanors, so that we're not filling up our jail for nonviolent crimes. It's issue a summons. I brought charging decisions away from police in-house that my team reviews before we charge people with crimes to make sure the facts are tight, to make sure they fit the crime, and that way we don't have to worry about overcharging folks. And if we have any sort of bias of overcharging, the buck stops with me as an independently elected prosecutor and the voters can vote me out. We also, one thing that I'm most particular of is we took a step back and asked a very complex question a very simple question that produced a complex result, and that is with nonviolent crimes that are in the courtroom, asking why. Why is this person in the courtroom? Why did he or she steal? We created a program that's the first of its kind in the country. That's a diversion program, so we heard about diversion. That is a pre-charge, it's a pre-charge diversion program that identifies and treats the root reasons of crime. We talk a lot about drug addiction and mental health, and we certainly screen for that because it's very important. But what makes our program unique is we partner with a third-party healthcare organization that then does a 32-question in-depth screening of that defendant that asks about drug addiction, mental health, but it also asks about transportation, food insecurity, housing, employment. And then each individual defendant gets a tailored plan specific to his or her needs as part of the diversion program. You know what the number one thing folks say the reason they steal is? Anyone have a guess? Hungry. Food. So in working with our food bank and our local food pantries, literally part of our diversion program is, where do you live? Did you know 2 blocks down the road is a food pantry? You don't have to steal. We had a mother steal a mattress, a baby infant mattress for her child. We have a significant and robust infant mortality task force and program in the city of Columbus. Connected her with those resources. You don't have to go steal that mattress from Target. So it's really, from a community safety standpoint, if you're really going to tackle recidivism, you have to step back and treat those underlying reasons why that person's committing a crime. Otherwise, it's that same thing of doing over and over and over again and expecting a different result. The pandemic hurt that program a little bit because the court system shut down. We had to scale back. So we took about a 14-month period off. We resumed it again. We've had about 170 people go through the program over the past 2.5 years. Again, 1 year was suspended. We've had 6 people reoffend. There isn't a criminal justice program in the country that is that successful. And I'm proud of the work that we've done in that space. And I really believe that is the future of criminal justice, is taking the time and developing plans that are specific to individuals to break that cycle of criminality, not because they're bad people, because they need help. And it's the public health aspect and approach of how we prosecute cases. On the flip side, being the lawyer for the Division of Police, and then I'll sit down, we've trying to be as influential as possible in reshaping how we police in the city of Columbus. We had protests and riots in the city of Columbus that did make national news. I was not proud of the way that the city of Columbus and the Division of Police handled the protests. I wasn't proud of the way that some of the protesters treated property damage and the way they treated the Division of Police. So we, under my discretion, appointed an independent prosecutor to prosecute independent prosecutor and independent investigator to prosecute those in the Division of Police that broke the law and assaulted individuals. At the same time, we prosecuted folks who committed violent crime and violent acts against others who were protesters. And then working with the Division of Police, we've also created a community immersion program. Going back to the question of having police officers, represent and look like the community that you serve. I grew up in rural southeastern Ohio, right on the river across from Parkersburg, West Virginia. When Parkersburg got an Outback Steakhouse, we were pumped, right? And now I'm the city attorney in the 14th. What's that?
Bloomin' onion.
Yeah, well, I was more of a cheese fries guy. But now I'm the city attorney in the 14th largest city in the United States, represent almost 1 million people. Most of the people that become Columbus Division of Police officers, they look like me and they're from where I came from, rural Ohio. That doesn't make them bad people, but certainly their perspective and the impressions and the stereotypes and their interactions of people of color, of the LGBTQ community, it's limited, it's different. Because maybe their only exposure to those select groups of people are what they see on TV or what they see on the internet. They have no real exposure growing up in towns that are 99% white. So we created an immersion program that before you get a badge and a gun, you go out in the community and you serve the community. You get to know who the community leaders are, get to know who the faith leaders are, understand the historical aspects of our neighborhood so that you're not hitting the ground with a badge and a gun on the day one with these predisposed ideas of the people that you're serving, that you're like, well, I met that person. That's, Pastor so-and-so, or that's Mrs. so-and-so over at the Driving Park neighborhood. And it drives that kind of grounding and understanding that is so important to actually serve the people that you're protecting.